Hello and welcome to the latest edition of the New Haven Independent Vlog News Summary, direct from our newsroom, otherwise known as my Compost Heap. Let's see what stories we're working on this week. Eddie's edible cannabis. Do you think this came? No, this did not come from a K-8 school or a high school, but it could have. Ever since cannabis recreational use was legalized for adults, kids have been showing up to schools, bouncing off the walls, just really like freaked out, and they've had to be sent to the hospital. A new policy was instituted at Amistad High School this week. They said any student under the influence of marijuana will be immediately sent to the hospital. Now, I'm not sure if just sending everyone who's using marijuana during the day to a hospital makes the best sense on public health grounds or efficiency, economics, or best way to stop them to do it. But I don't fault the schools for trying to figure out what to do. It's good that cannabis is legal, but it's not a good thing among all the other problems schools have to deal with if kids are coming out freaked out. Whoa, this week I got some brand new Martin Looney for State Senate pot holders, speaking of pot. And he uses those in his campaign, so some things don't change. It's kind of comforting. Do you know that I have an original one that I still use from the 1990s when Martin Looney was running for state senate? So let's say that while so much is changing so much fast in the world, we do have some continuity. Except to when it comes to what they're drinking on the campaign trail. Now, it used to be, not that long ago, we picked a candidate based on who you'd rather have a beer with. I know that's not an intelligent way that just pollsters just say that. This week I learned that Angels envy bourbon actually has played a role in this fall's election season. I never heard of this until Sunday when someone at the wine trader on What he said, this is a new bourbon, everyone's like it, or it's newly popular. I'd never heard it before. Then a couple days later I was talking to Stephanie Thomas, she was on WNHH radio, she's the Democratic candidate for Secretary of the State, top elections official. She's in a prominent role now, but in the spring she was one of 8 people trying for the job and she was considered having no shot, because a lot of other people have been longer in office, had more money, name recognition, but she was the surprise winner at the Democratic convention. Dan Harr of Hearst Newspapers, great political columnist, actually talked to the delegates at the time, why did you pick Stephanie? And they said, well, she met one-on-one with so many of us, gave us time, and she impressed us the old-fashioned way. And one delegate said, we invited her in for the glass of bourbon, and she spent an hour. But Harr didn't reveal what kind of bourbon. So I asked Stephanie Thomas this week, these months later, and she remembered it, even though she's not a bourbon drinker. She likes rye. But she said she had Angel's envy, and she liked it. So I did some digging, and it turns out, all bourbon is aged in oak barrels from Kentucky. But this, they do differently. After that process, they spend 6 months putting it in port wine barrels. It makes it taste different. So that is the reason. The knives were out this week, period, at the Board of Alders in City Hall. There was a vendetta, a score to be settled. The Alders, some of them, have been mad for years. A guy named Matthew Nemerson, who's devoted decades, his entire adult life, to public service in government roles, private roles on boards. And the mayor tapped Nemerson, who's a former development administrator, to be a volunteer on the powerless redevelopment agency. In other words, even though the mayor didn't agree with Nemerson on some stuff, he said, you're really smart. Matter of fact, no one's pretty much smarter than Nemerson when it comes to the history of development in New Haven. I always learn from him, even though I don't always agree. And the mayor said, you'd be a good guy to volunteer your time if you give up your nights instead of watching TV, reading books, taking walks. Come spend hours trying to figure out issues in government with people who have different points of view and sit on the redevelopment agency. We never say no to that stuff, but the Alders shot it down to get back at him for times they disagreed with him or he was difficult to work with. I think that's a crazy way to try to get as many volunteers as we can to make city boards work, because they're giving up a lot already to volunteer. And it's important that we can disagree with them, because I totally disagree with Matthew about a lot of stuff, even though I respect him and he knows so much. For instance, he wanted to be on the Redevelopment Authority, he said, to give it new power. Back in urban renewal, redevelopment was a monster. It took away people's property all over the place, knocked it down, thought planners knew better than people who make individual decisions where to invest their money and live, and destroyed swaths of the city. We're still trying to recover. Matthew's argument is we can learn from the past and do it better and have a role for eminent domain. I respectfully argue that the way we learn from the past is not do it anymore. Don't use eminent domain for redevelopment, for economic projects that planners have. Let's just use it if there's a threat to public health. All right. Well, gun violence obviously continues unabated in our city, and it's over the stupidest stuff. They're not really using knives anymore to settle disputes. Remember the 90s, we said so many of the killings were over like crack trade and business, and it's occasionally true. But as you read in this book, a new great book about gun violence in our city and its roots, The Other Side of Prospect, written by New Haven's Nicholas Davidoff. You can read about in The Independent. We're trying to figure out the roots of why people are killing themselves over stupid stuff because the guns are available and they're not settling disputes other ways. This week, a warrant was issued, an arrest made in the arrest, a July 3rd murder of 17-year-old John Tuback, a kid everybody loved from New Haven Public Schools. And it turns out that it was an argument about some guy said that Tuback had been racing his car in front of the street and bothering him. So the guy confronted him. He had a gun. Then he saw a BB gun that he thought was a real gun in the guy's car and shot him. Well, we need to talk about this, folks, because I'm sorry I don't have easy answers to this. I don't think it's a liberal or conservative thing. I think we got to figure this thing out and talk about it a lot. It started this week in Davidoff's book, which is, I really recommend reading it. And if you're like Matthew Nemerson, you now have time at night to read books instead of sit through long, boring meetings for no money. You can read it too, and let's talk about it. The first conversation started this week at the public library. You can read about it in The Independent. Tom Breen was there. It continues on October 26th at 6 p.m. next week at the Stetson Branch Library. Diane Brown and Michael Jefferson will be the author talking. Let's talk, and let's not just talk, let's take action. Until next time, this is the New Haven Independent Vlog News Summary, and remember, always pick up your trash.